The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the sound of my husband's trembling breath. His hand was cold, his eyes avoiding mine, as if guilt had already swallowed him whole. And then, with a single push, he handed me into the arms of the man I feared the most, the kidnapper. My world collapsed in that moment. I thought it was the end of everything, my safety, my dignity, my love. But what I didn't know was that fate had a secret written for me, one that would turn pain into the strangest kind of love. Welcome to the Untold Love, a place where hidden stories of the heart unfold. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay connected with us. I still remember the first time I saw him. His smile carried a warmth that melted every fear in me, and his words felt like promises written in the language of forever. I was young, too young to know what life could demand from love, but in his presence, everything seemed simple, almost dreamlike. He wasn't the most perfect man in the eyes of the world, but for me, he was the center of my little universe. Our marriage happened quietly, without the grand celebrations you see in movies. Yet for me, it was no less magical. The day I wore that simple dress and walked towards him, I believed I was stepping into a life of trust, laughter, and endless companionship. He held my hand tightly, whispering vows that weren't written on paper but engraved in my heart. That was the beginning of us, two souls bound together with the hope of forever. In those first few months, life felt like a tender song. He would wait for me at the door when I returned from visiting my family, sometimes holding a small gift, sometimes nothing but his smile. I cooked meals we shared on the same plate, laughed at jokes only we understood, and listened to his dreams late into the night. I thought I had found my safe place in him, a man who would never let me fall. But love, I've learned, has its illusions. Even in those days of happiness, there were shadows I chose not to see. He would sometimes fall into silence, staring into nothingness as though his thoughts were chained to a world I couldn't enter. There were nights when I reached for his hand, only to find it cold, withdrawn. I told myself it was stress, that life weighed heavily on him. I convinced myself that my love would heal whatever sorrow lived inside his heart. Yet, I was blind. Too blinded by the dream of being his forever to notice the cracks already spreading beneath our foundation. My friends warned me once, gently saying he seemed restless, distracted. But I defended him fiercely. You don't know him like I do, I'd say, with a smile that hid my own uncertainty. I believed in him more than I believed in myself. I trusted him with a devotion so complete, I never imagined betrayal could live in the same house where we laughed and dreamed. Little did I know, the man I thought was my anchor would one day let me drift into the deepest storm of my life. It began with little changes, so small that at first, I ignored them. He started coming home late, his shirt smelling faintly of smoke, his eyes avoiding mine. The laughter that once lived between us was replaced with silence, heavy and uncomfortable. His phone became his closest companion, always clutched tightly, the screen tilted away from my gaze. I asked questions, but he answered with half smiles and words too brief to hold any truth. I wanted to believe it was work, stress, or some unseen burden pressing on his shoulders. After all, hadn't I promised to stand beside him in every storm? But the more I tried to reach him, the farther he drifted. At night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his restless breaths, feeling the space between us grow wider with every passing hour. Then came that evening, the one that changed everything. The sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that press down on your chest and make the air harder to breathe. He told me we were going for a drive, his voice strangely firm, leaving no room for questions. My heart whispered warnings, but my trust silenced them. I followed him, still holding on to the hope that maybe this night would clear the distance between us. We drove in silence. The road stretched endlessly ahead, lit only by the pale glow of streetlights. I wanted to ask where we were going, but something in his face, his tight jaw, his cold eyes, kept me quiet. My hands trembled in my lap, and I tried to remind myself that this was my husband, the man I loved. How could I fear him? When the car stopped, we weren't at a friend's house, or a quiet cafe, or anywhere familiar. Instead, the place was dark, isolated, with shadows that seemed to move on their own. He stepped out quickly, opening my door. Before I could even speak. And then I saw him. A man stood there in the dim light, broad-shouldered, his eyes sharp and unreadable. The air grew colder as my husband pushed me gently, but firmly, towards him. My heart thudded so loudly I thought the world could hear it. I searched my husband's face for reassurance, for love, for anything that could explain what was happening. But he didn't meet my eyes. He looked away, as though I had already ceased to exist for him. In that single moment, the truth pierced me deeper than any blade. I was not his wife, his love, or his companion. I was a burden he had chosen to hand over. And as the stranger's grip closed around my arm, I realized the betrayal I had feared most wasn't just real, it was staring me in the face. The first hours of my captivity were nothing short of a nightmare. The place he took me was dark and unfamiliar, a room with walls that seemed to breathe fear, its silence broken only by the echo of my own heartbeat. My wrists trembled as I sat on the cold floor, tears blurring my vision. I kept asking myself the same question, why did my husband hand me over like this? The man I trusted most had abandoned me, and now I was in the hands of a stranger whose intentions I couldn't read. At first, he was rough, his voice sharp as he ordered me to stay quiet. His steps were heavy, echoing like thunder against the wooden floor. I braced myself for cruelty, for pain, for the worst fate I could imagine. And yet, nothing happened. He didn't strike me, didn't shout beyond what was necessary. Instead, he sat in silence across the room, his eyes watchful. But not hateful, as though he was guarding a prisoner he never wanted. Hours turned into days, and slowly, I began to notice the cracks in his harshness. When the nights grew cold, I woke to find a blanket draped over me, though I never saw him place it there. When hunger twisted my stomach, food appeared quietly, simple. Bread, water, sometimes a bowl of warm soup. He never said much, never offered explanations, but his actions spoke in ways I couldn't ignore. Fear still lived inside me, but confusion began to grow beside it. Who was this man? A kidnapper, yes, but not the monster I had imagined. There was something in his eyes of pain, sorrow, maybe even regret, that unsettled me more than his silence. One evening, I dared to speak. My voice was shaky, but my words slipped out. Why are you doing this? He didn't answer at first. He simply looked at me, his gaze sharp, almost wounded, before turning away. The silence was heavier than any response, but in that silence, I sensed a story, one he wasn't ready to tell. The strangest part was the safety I began to feel. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was far from the terror I had expected. In the stillness of that small room, I realized something unsettling. In his presence, I felt less abandoned than I had in my husband's. The man who should have been my protector had betrayed me. And this stranger, the one I should have feared, was the only one who hadn't turned his back on me. Days blended into nights, and captivity no longer felt like a single moment of terror, it became a strange rhythm, an existence I never imagined for myself. I thought silence would suffocate me, but instead, it became the doorway to something I didn't expect, understanding. One night, when the world outside was swallowed by darkness and only a dim lamp lit the room, he finally spoke. His voice was low, almost broken, as if the words had been caged inside him for too long. He told me about his past, not all at once, but in fragments, like shattered glass piecing itself together. He had once loved deeply. A woman who had been his whole world, much like my husband had been for me. But betrayal had destroyed him. She had chosen another, leaving him hollow, drowning in debts and anger he didn't deserve. That pain, that abandonment, had hardened him into the man the world feared. Yet, beneath it all, the wounds were still raw, still bleeding. As he spoke, I realized something uncanny, our stories were mirrors of each other. Different people. Different choices, but the same scars. Betrayal had broken us both. My heart, still bruised by my husband's treachery, ached at the weight of his confession. For the first time, I saw him not as a kidnapper, but as a man. A man who had been wounded, who had built walls around his heart not to hurt others, but to shield himself. His eyes, once sharp and unreadable, now carried a softness I hadn't seen before. That night, our silence was no longer a prison, it was a bridge. We shared stories, not to justify our pain, but to release it. I told him about the night my husband gave me away, how the man I had trusted with my life treated me like nothing more than currency. He listened without interruption, his jaw tightening with quiet fury, as though my pain had somehow become his own. Then came the moment that shifted everything. The door rattled, footsteps outside, a threat I didn't understand. For the first time, he stood protectively in front of me, shielding me with his body as if I mattered. In that gesture, something inside me shifted too. He wasn't just keeping me captive anymore, he was keeping me safe. And it terrified me. Because somewhere in the midst of fear, I felt something else growing, trust. A fragile, trembling trust that maybe, just maybe, this man wasn't the villain in my story. Perhaps he was the unexpected chapter one was never meant to skip. The heart is a strange thing. It doesn't always follow reason, nor does it obey the rules we set for it. In captivity, I should have hated him. I should have counted every moment as a curse. But instead, I found myself listening to his silences, waiting for his words, and feeling an unfamiliar safety in his presence. The more I learned of his story, the more I saw my own reflection in him. He, too, had once trusted blindly. He, too, had once believed love was unbreakable. And just like me, he had been abandoned, betrayed, discarded. Two broken souls, sitting across from each other, sharing wounds we never thought anyone would understand. One evening, he returned later than usual. His hands were bruised, his knuckles scraped, and worry twisted inside me. I surprised myself when I reached for his hand, whispering, "Are you hurt?" He looked at me, stunned, as though kindness was something foreign to him. His voice trembled when he said, "Why do you care? I am the one who holds you captive." But that wasn't the truth anymore. Deep down, I knew he wasn't keeping me here out of cruelty. He was keeping me here because letting go meant exposing me to dangers even he couldn't control. And perhaps, he didn't want to let go. It was around this time that the truth about my husband fully unraveled. I learned he hadn't been threatened, nor forced. He had willingly handed me away, trading my safety for the price of his own freedom. The man I thought was my protector had sold me like an object. That realization burned through me, sharper than any chain. The betrayal that once broke me now freed me from him, from the illusion of our love, from the lies I had clung to. One night, the man I once called my captor sat across from me, his voice unsteady. "If you hate me for what I've done, I'll let you go." His words should have brought me joy. Freedom was finally within my reach. But my heart hesitated. Because freedom without him suddenly felt like another kind of prison. I looked into his eyes, searching for cruelty, for deception, for any reason to run. But all I found was sincerity. And a love he was too afraid to name. My voice shook as I whispered, "I don't hate you. I never could." In that moment, I realized my heart had made its choice. Not for the man who betrayed me, but for the one who, against all odds, had protected me, even from himself. Love did not come to me dressed in roses and gold. It came quietly, like the slow dawn after a long night, slipping into my heart when I least expected it. By the time I realized what I felt, I was no longer a prisoner, I was a woman standing at the edge of a choice. He never forced me. Not once. In fact, he kept his distance more than he should have, as though afraid his presence would wound me further. But his actions spoke louder than any vow ever could. He protected me when danger knocked, fed me when hunger stole my strength, and guarded my tears as though they were treasures. Somewhere in that dark place, he gave me back the pieces of myself that betrayal had stolen. The day came when he asked me, with a trembling voice, "Do you want to leave? You are free now." My heart raced, torn between the life I once thought I wanted and the man who had become my truth. For a moment, I closed my eyes, seeing my husband's face, cold, distant, filled with greed. And then I opened them, looking at the man before me, flawed, scarred, yet honest in a way no one had ever been with me. I stepped closer, my voice steadied despite the storm in my chest. I don't want freedom, if it means losing you. His eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw something I never thought I'd see in him. Hope. Our union was nothing like the grand weddings sung about in stories. There were no flowers. No guests, no music to announce our vows. Just the two of us, under a quiet sky, promising with our hearts what words could never fully capture. He didn't slip a diamond ring onto my hand, but when he held my fingers with trembling care, it felt more precious than any jewel. Becoming his bride wasn't about erasing the past. It was about reclaiming myself, choosing love not from a place of illusion, but from truth. Fate had thrown me into his arms in the cruelest of ways, yet it was in those arms I finally understood what it meant to be cherished. I was no longer the woman betrayed, abandoned, or broken. I was a woman reborn, standing beside the man who once held me captive but ended up setting me free, free to love, free to live, free to begin again. Life rarely gives us the endings we imagine. As a little girl, I dreamed of fairy tales, love that conquers all, a husband who would fight the world to protect me, a home filled with trust and laughter. Instead, I was handed to a stranger by the very man who once promised to love me forever. My world shattered in a single moment, and I thought I would never rise from that ruin, but fate has its own language. Sometimes it speaks in storms. Sometimes in silence, and sometimes through the very person we least expect. The man who should have been my captor became my shelter. The arms that were meant to bind me became the place where I finally learned freedom. He didn't rescue me with wealth or promises, he rescued me with truth, with patience, and with the quiet kind of love that asks for nothing but gives everything. Even now, when I look back, I don't see my story as one of betrayal alone. Yes. My husband broke me. He handed me away like I was worth nothing. But if not for that betrayal, I would have never discovered the depth of my own strength, or the beauty of a love born not from illusion, but from shared wounds. Ours is not a perfect story, it never will be. The scars of the past remain, etched in our hearts like old ink on fragile paper. Yet, those scars no longer define us, they remind us of where we have been, and how far we have come. In his presence, I learned that love is not about possession or grand gestures. It is about protection in silence, about listening without judgment, about choosing someone again and again, even when life makes it impossible. Today, I stand not as a victim, but as a woman who has lived through betrayal, fear, and loss, and found love where no one believed it could exist. My husband's cruelty may have written the first chapter of this story, but it was fate, and the quiet kindness of a broken man, that wrote the last. So when I tell you that I became his bride, understand this, I did not marry a captor. I married a man who, in saving me, unknowingly saved himself. And together, we built not the life we dreamed of, but the life destiny chose for us, a life stitched with scars, but also with love strong enough to endure them.